Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the all-new Urban Legends video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions. This one having to do with yet another fascinating location that I just definitely had to share with everyone here. I'll probably actually end up doing about another one or two or more of these videos, and then I'll give this series a brief rest. So thank you everyone for your suggestions, and I'll start working on other things afterward. But yes, a fascinating location that has to do with a mysterious mountain there in Australia that to this day has many legends, many mysterious items tied to it. So when I was reading the information, I definitely had to share it with everyone here. The other reason that I picked it was because I believe this mountain was actually talked about within one of my favorite books that I read a couple of years back. It's called Through a Mystic Glass, and it's by Dr. David Marsh. I'll go ahead and I'll include the link for it below. It's free now, so if you wanted to read it on your phone or read it on your tablet, it's a free PDF, and it's a good maybe 10 or so tales associated with cursed objects, haunted locations, areas that just all around have a creepiness factor to them. And I think one of the chapters, if I recall correctly, had to do with a specific mountain in Australia. And I think that's what they were talking about here. So check out that link if you have a chance, if you're a fan of that kind of stuff. And it's free again. You will not regret reading it. But yes, in this case, for this video, let's go ahead and let's talk about this. You're looking at it now. It's known as the Black Mountain, but its other term is known as the Mountain of Death. So definitely a captivating name now whenever you hear something like that. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info associated with this location. So what is this Black Mountain, or the Mountain of Death? Well, it's a mountain that's located there in Queensland, Australia. And for what it looks like in some of the pics that you'll see here and going forward, do not let its size fool you. It's actually very large. It looks like it's just a small hill in some pictures, but no, actually it can reach upwards of 900 feet tall. On top of that, some of the boulders that you'll be seeing within some of the pictures here are actually, they look small, but they're actually the size of a house and upwards. So this is definitely a mountain where it looks can be deceiving. As far as how it was made, when it was made, apparently around 250 million years ago, there was some type of activity that occurred that caused magma to rise right in that location. And when that happened, this magma solidified, and then it just stayed that distinct black coloration pretty much ever since then. I imagine that that was the same color that it had all back then up until now. And so because of it, there's like a coating of iron and then apparently a manganese, something that's oxidized within it. It prevents most wildlife or plantation, plants and other type of forestry type stuff to grow on it. And so when that happens, that creates and keeps its distinct black coloration. That's what makes it look so ominous. Now you will see every now and then like little patches of greenery that grow from within certain areas. Like there's apparently a green algae that grows prominently in certain locations, but for the most part it'll have just one solid black status associated with it, but very eerie whenever you see it from afar, let alone coming up close to it. And then as far as the ominous stuff tied to it, apparently there's been for the longest time a sense that there's bad stuff with this location. In fact, there were some natives that lived there. There were a group of people, they were called the Kuku Onyungukal. I'm not going to try to say that again, but I think that's what it was called, what they were called. And they named it the place of the spear, and that's how it translated to them as the Mountain of Death. And they basically just associated lots of bad things with it. They considered it to house evil spirits, maybe even demons, all of them always lurking for souls. There was even apparently a medicine man, someone that went wrong within their location, and he ended up dying there, but he houses himself within the mountain and he's known as the eater of flesh. And there's apparently other ghosts that roam around that location. There's shadows that people see within those caverns as well. All this stuff that just basically comes from there, that at least the Aborigines there, they refuse to go to that location. And it's pretty wise because from a physical standpoint, I'll explain more on the dangers of going there, but at least from the supernatural standpoint, that's everything that people have stated that's wrong with the mountain. And so that's why it creates just an ominous feeling whenever you go there. It doesn't help that apparently all those caverns that you see, what happens is the rocks, the way they were formed, all that time period back then, they created this branch of caverns that extend inward into the mountain. You can basically go anywhere within the mountain itself and you will always find some kind of cavern. It makes it very inviting, almost like it's almost like a unwelcome of sorts. Like they want you. In other words, whatever is there from that mountain wants you to go and see it, and then try to peek inside. And that's where apparently where it gets you, because these caverns just go one into the other and then into another turn, and then before you know it, you're hopelessly lost. I'm going to talk about more about that here in the experience, because one of the biggest mystifying things that's tied to this location is the fact that there's so many disappearances associated with it. People that just vanish without a trace. Not only that, but cattle that vanish without a trace as well. And all of it seems to come from this magic mountain. Whatever it seems to have within it, there's certain properties that just make it so mysterious. There's another part too that just adds to its aura. It's this: for whatever happens with the mountain, apparently it exudes some kind of unexplained phenomenon, something that seems to disrupt equipment that you try to bring or that flies around. So let's say if you wanted to be brave and wanted to explore the mountain yourself, and let's say you're going to be prepared for it, you're going to have your checklist, you're going to have your compass and other type of GPS equipment. Well, apparently if you go to that mountain specifically, then something happens to the equipment itself. It'll make it go awry. And when that happens, then you'll have pretty much no chance of finding your way out unless you have other more conventional methods. Even airplanes that fly nearby the mountain itself, apparently they avoid that location specifically because of these anomalies. Whatever is happening seems to create something not only bad with their equipment, but there's this air turbulence that also comes from the mountain. And when that occurs, any planes flying nearby seem to have very, very bad things tied to them. You can see that there's so much already mysteriousness associated with it. It's all dangerous. I haven't even talked about some of the more natural dangerousness associated with the mountain. That includes some of the predators that apparently lurk there. There's snakes. There's other type of carnivores that walk around that location too. There's even more unexplained phenomenon associated with mysterious creatures that roam around that location too. So definitely something you want to avoid if you can. But the biggest factor, the biggest thing that leads again to the mountain of death and why it's called that is because of the way that the caverns create so much disappearance. People that go there to this day, I don't know why, but they'll try to be able to get into the mountain, maybe even almost like a dare, try to see how far they can go in without, let's say, getting lost. But whatever this mountain does, it almost purposely seems to deceive people, giving them a false sense of confidence. Like the further they get in, they realize wherever I just turned, I remember where that was. And then when they turn back, they'll realize that it's different. Scary stuff when you think about it, because it's almost like this mountain is tricking people's minds when it comes to their false hope. Like they look in a certain place and they realize all of a sudden they're somewhere else. And that's because these caverns, and as inviting as they look, they pretty much stretch inward deep into the mountain. And then when that happens, you're pretty much left on your own if you have if you get lost, and you'll have pretty much very little hope of doing so. In fact, here's some of the earliest encounters associated with disappearances. So apparently in 1877, there was a courier, a guy by the name of Grainer, who went on horseback, not just with himself, but went with a horse and then also with a calf. He disappeared. There were searches made of the mountain to see what happened to him, but it was assumed that what had happened was these chasms and these caverns that I was mentioning earlier, because they create a false illusion. The most common theory is that people fall. Like people actually fall deep within the chasms because they forget, they skip a step somewhere, or they're thinking they're stepping on something solid when it turns out there's nothing there, and then boom, all of a sudden they're falling down into the mountain. no chance, no hope. And this is another situation where, like my other popular video involving John Jones, like where people just get hopelessly stuck somewhere and then that's it. Can you imagine that? Like imagine being lost in this mountain, deep within some cavern, stuck somewhere, and there's no chance for you to be able to get out, and then all of a sudden the light that you have vanishes and that's it. Like, no thank you. That's something that I'm definitely not gonna do. But there was another one, criminal. Another story was a criminal by the name of Sugarfoot Jack, who apparently tried to flee some police that were there, and when he did so, he thought he was going to be lucky and hide into the mountain. Unfortunately, though, after the shootout, and he went into the mountain, he was never ever seen again. There was another situation a couple of years later involving a constable by the name of Ryan. He also went into the mountain. He disappeared, even just almost as if he was swallowed by the mountain itself, and as quickly as that, never ever was seen again. Another local man by the name of Harry Owens was also there. He was looking for some of his stray cattle, and as he went into the mountain, he was never seen again. There was another story involving an officer that went into the cave. Apparently, they were trying to search for some kind of missing men as well. Two of them went in, only one of them came out. And the person that came out, the officer, apparently was so frightened, so terrified of whatever he encountered within the mountain that he never ever gave a report afterward. Like whatever he saw, whatever he experienced, he kept it to himself after all that time. Even cave explorers who purposely went into the mountain to see if they could solve whatever was there. They wanted to experience it not just for themselves, but be the ones to create the answers to the mysteriousness associated with the mountain. Well, guess what? Two of them went in and they never came out. They were actually, this was in the 20s, they were actually never ever found. Even another backpacker, in this case in 1932, they went missing while they went hiking into the mountains, also, trying to no doubt find out the solution associated with the mountains, and they were gone too. Lots and lots of evidence, as you can see, as far as going there. That's why I was mentioning at the very beginning of the video, lots of trepidation. If you want to go see this mountain, go see it from afar. That's what I would do. If I'm ever there in Queensland, Australia, I'm never ever going to get close to this mountain. Maybe I might push it towards the border, but that's about it. But if I see any caverns, any chasms, anything as far as an opening, I'm not taking it because of everything that I just mentioned on there too. One person that actually survived was able to give his experience. He was someone that apparently was brave enough to go into the mountain and then was able to come back. But his experience gives a good idea of essentially the falseness, the false imagery that the mountain almost purposely creates. He stated, "I stepped into the opening like other Black Mountain caves, it dipped steeply downwards, narrowing as it went. And then suddenly he found himself inside or facing a solid wall of rock." Remember I was mentioning earlier, it's like people try to memorize where they're going and thinking they're going to see an image in front of it and think to themselves, as long as I see that again, then I'll be fine. But here's what happened next. But to the right there was a passageway just large enough for me to enter in a stooping position. And so I moved along it carefully for several yards. The floor was fairly level. The walls of very smooth granite. And then the passage twisted and turned this way and that, always sloping deeper into the earth. And then he said at that point, that's when he began to feel uneasy. And that's when he also heard bat wings. That's right, I forgot to mention this too. Lots of animals that live from the mountain are bats themselves. And they can create, no doubt, an instant sense of just panic. Imagine a large amount of bats all of a sudden flapping around everywhere. Obviously, someone like an intruder like yourself within the cave itself, and when that happens, you'll just start running away and helplessly get lost at that point. So he heard this huge bat wings against nearby, but he pushed on forward, and he said, "Soon my nostrils were filled with a sickly, musty stench, and then my torch went out." Someone mentioned in one of my other videos, because when I heard torch, I thought it was like a fire on a stick, but someone else mentioned that that's another term for flashlight, if I'm not mistaken. And then he said that's when he was in total darkness. And from somewhere that seemed like the bowels of the earth, I could hear a faint moaning, which was then followed by the flapping of wings and thousands of bats. And that's when he began to panic. He said, "I began to panic as I groped and floundered back the way I thought I had come. My arms and legs were bleeding from bumps with unseen rocks." That's another thing that I remember reading from that book, Through the Mystic Glass, how people were mentioning their experiences within that mountain there. This mountain can cause extreme harm because of the unseen jagged points that people don't realize are coming up. And when that happens, that's when they can cut themselves, or worse, break something. And then that's when it'll cause things to go even worse. And so here's where he stated, "My outstretched hands clawed out of space. I expected solid walls and floors, but couldn't find it. At one stage where I had wandered into a side passage, I came to the brink of what was undoubtedly a precipice, judging by the echoes. And then the air was afoul, and I felt increasing dizziness." And so terrifying thoughts were racing through my mind about giant rock pythons I have seen around this mountain. And as I crawled along, getting weaker and losing hope of ever coming out alive, that's when he saw it. He saw a tiny streak of light, and it gave him super strength to worm his way towards a small cave. And as it turns out, when he was finishing his story, he was now more than half a mile away of when he entered. So you see the false imagery that the mountain craves. Whenever you go into it, you go into a passageway, you try to memorize things, all of a sudden it'll trick you, and before you know it, you're actually much further away than when you started without even realizing it. All of a sudden, you're that far away. In his case, he was half a mile away from where he was. In fact, he stated that he found out he was actually underground for 5 hours too. So it must have been horrifying for him, like horrifyingly quick. But in this case, 5 hours had gone by, and that's how far away he was. So that's a good experience, an in-deep experience associated with the calamities tied to this mountain. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information that I could find associated with it. There was brief mentions tied to as well, like UFOs apparently move around that location too. And then I was mentioning earlier about other cryptids as well. I might save that for another video, but I just wanted to give a good sense more of the legends tied to this mountain. But if anyone has any more information, anything else I might have missed about this magic mountain, this black mountain, this mountain of death that's tied to there in Queensland, Australia, please let me know. Please post those comments. Anyone else have been lucky enough to go there, maybe see it from afar? What's your experience like? Did you get to see the passageways? Did you get to see those infamous entries into the mountains? Maybe even hear all that wailing and moaning that people say comes from the darkness itself? If so, I would love for you to be able to share it in the comments below. So, all right, everyone. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.